welcome to today's session where we'll be talking about the future of energy innovation. My name is Wei Min from SGInnovate. We are a government-owned organization in Singapore who believes in the positive impact of deep tech to benefit humanity. A good part of our work involves building a global community of scientists, investors, corporate innovators, startups to build and scale up deep tech solutions in areas such as AI, medical technologies, quantum technologies, and autonomous systems that can be applied across industries for a better tomorrow in today's world. Today, as part of our work to promote knowledge sharing, we are very happy to collaborate and partner with ADB-DutchCham to present to you this webinar on the future of energy innovation, where we connect startups and corporates in exploring collaborative efforts on the topic, such as works on decarbonizing Singapore with innovation solutions and bringing about a sustainable energy future for all. So with no further ado, I will actually pass my time to Tias from ADB-DutchCham to say a few words before handing over to Jin, our moderator for this discussion, to start the event. Tias, please.
Thank you very much, Wei Min. Well, on behalf of the Dutch Chamber of Commerce, welcome everybody. So my name is Tias van Mossel and I'm the chairman of the sustainability community at the Dutch Chamber of Commerce, which you might also know as ADB-DutchCham. So the Dutch Chamber of Commerce, the Dutch Chamber is organized around 9 theme-based communities, and the sustainability community is one of them. So with this community, we aim to provide a network for sustainability professionals to share knowledge and connect. We do this by organizing breakfast sessions, writing articles, and organizing events like today's panel discussion. So topics vary from sustainable finance or circular business models to talking about the future of energy. This really depends on what our community is asking for. So if you have any ideas or suggestions, please let us know. You can do that by chat or afterwards contacting us. So today's session, it really illustrates perfectly what we want to achieve with our sustainability community at ADB-DutchCham. Bringing like-minded professionals together, both DutchCham members and non-members, many different nationalities with various backgrounds, from multinationals, SMEs, and startups. We therefore very much appreciate this opportunity to organize today's session together with SGInnovate. I guess that's it. Thank you all for your attention, and I'll give the word to Jin.
Thank you, Tias. Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Lim Jin, and I'm a director at Positive Energy, which is a startup that aims to simplify financing for small to mid-sized renewable energy projects. It does this by aggregating projects on one hand and aggregating investors and debt providers on the other hand. And through an online platform, the both sides get to meet and start talking to each other and do due diligence in an online data room, which is, you know, a timely tool to have in these times where we're working from home. To start off with today's plenary, you know, as anyone who's read The Prize by Daniel Yergin will say, the history of oil is the history of the modern world. And the history of oil began when J.D. Rockefeller founded Standard Oil in America. It grew so big that an antitrust case in 1911 broke it up into several smaller bits. Chevron, Exxon, Mobil, and Amoco, amongst others. That was how big it was. Fast forward to 2020, on Mother's Day earlier this month, when I opened the papers, and this was the Washington Post, I saw an article with the headline, "Fund built on big oil dumps fossil fuels and boosts its returns." So 5 years ago, the heirs to the Rockefeller Trust Fund decided to break away from investing in fossil fuels. The very thing that had made them wildly rich, beyond most people's imaginations. Now back in 2014, it was at best a symbolic move. I mean, people were still highly invested in fossil fuels. You couldn't, with world trade at its peak. You just couldn't break away from it. 5 years later, with the world struggling with the pandemic, a plunge in the price of oil, and huge market upheavals, it now looks much more than a symbolic move. It looks like a really smart financial decision. It was prescient, isn't it? Now, across the board, studies published by the IEA and IRENA have revealed that energy consumption of traditional sources of energy like coal and oil over the past few months have gone down significantly, but not renewables. So Gavin's going to be able to talk to us about that. As countries move towards thinking more about managing climate change, we've always been conscious of the fact that innovation is key to the transition. Not just innovation in technology, which is where Jan Tika will come in, but also in financing tools, in government policy. That'll be Adeline's purview later on. All of these led to the discovery of oil, to the development of how we use oil, and to worldwide economic growth. But things have changed. We'd like to say that things have changed. Well, first, scientists had to tell the world that we need to make a conscious decision to invest in green energy, or we'll be killing ourselves, and we're moving towards extinction of the human race. And then secondly, if financial returns is more your cup of tea than Greta Thunberg, then it was also possible to say, hey, look, the price of wind and solar energy has now gone down so much, it's cheaper than using oil or coal. Shift your investments to green energy, right? But we can't say that anymore. Now, on the 10th of May, the Rockefeller Fund returns looked really good. So that was a snapshot on the 10th of May. As we move along this trajectory, if people continue to stay at home and stop flying, will the transition to green energy still be at the top of people's minds? Will people continue to think that it's that going green is the way of the future? Or will people just say, look, we'll just not travel so much, we'll travel once a year, it'll be a blast, and then that's it. Will governments still be focused on these goals? Right? Now, with these questions in mind, I'd like to invite our distinguished speakers to give a short introduction of themselves in turn, and then we'll move on to the meat of our debate today. Let's start with Adeline.
Sure. Thanks, Jen. Hi everyone. I'm Adeline, and I'm from the Singapore Economic Development Board. And we are a government agency under the Ministry of Trade and Industry in Singapore, responsible for investment promotion as well as industry development. And specifically, my team, I lead efforts, in the EDB to drive and really develop environmental sustainability as a growth engine for Singapore, and to also work closely with our industry partners to think about how they can decarbonize. So that's really something that I was working on. I'm fairly new to this role, and I just kind of started last year, and that was something that I've been working on since the end of last year, until kind of like COVID struck, and then and since then, actually my team, my title says environmental sustainability, but actually people, what people don't see is, actually a few months ago, my team was actually called the Energy, Chemicals and Materials Industry Development Practice. And that's interesting because, actually, to be honest, it's kind of more or less the same work that we're doing in terms of, working with industry partners to think about energy transition and environmental sustainability. It's just that you know, here at the board, we recognize that, you know, it's become such a big force and such a big trend that we really need to expand our scope, you know, of partners beyond just the energy and chemicals industry to work with many of the other, you know, energy intensive industry players, as well as the stakeholders, you know, including the service providers and so on, who are interested in doing that in Singapore. So that's what I had been doing, you know, or like trying to shift focus to over the last, well, in the 6 months and before, and then COVID struck, and now, you know, we've been actually really working closely for the last few months, you know, with our stakeholders in the industry to make sure that, you know, industry development doesn't get stalled, you know, while you know, we deal with the crisis and so on. So that's what I've been busy with, and I think a few, you know, those who are based in Singapore, you know, that, you know, recently our Trade and Industry Ministry just released, you know, an announcement, actually just yesterday, was it yesterday, time flies, but yeah, about how Singapore was planning to gradually reopen its economy after the current circuit breaker, and that's what we've been really busy with. But I mean, the reason why we've been busy is because, well, even while the crisis efforts and, you know, the response and partnership with industry has been ongoing, we've not, you know, lost our focus on a lot of the ongoing work and the base work that we've been doing to try and drive, you know, environmental sustainability in Singapore. So it's kind of like a double whammy for the team, I suppose. Yeah. But yes, I can share a little bit more about that and the commitments that Singapore has made later on. But I think maybe, you know, I'll hand over that time to Gavin, maybe. Yeah.
Thank you, Adeline. Yeah, that sounds hopeful. Over to you, Gavin.
Hi everyone. My name's Gavin. I'm working at Total. I don't know if you can see, but there is a solar underneath the Total. So I'm working in Total Solar. I'm a solar guy. I've been working in solar for 15 years. I've started various startups. One was sold to Shell. The other was sold to Total end of 2017. And the business that I'm running is essentially that startup, which has then been absorbed by Total. What we do is, the business model is really simple, right? We put a solar system on a building, on a facility. We do all the investment, and we have a long-term power contract with a customer where we're selling power to that customer over, you know, 20 years or 15 years or something like that. And the cost of our power is much, much cheaper than the grid. Almost any grid anywhere in the world, you can subsidize it, you can do whatever you like. We're 20, 30, 40, maybe 50% cheaper than the grid. And we reduce carbon. And I've learned, having been in Asia now, having been in Southeast Asia now for about 10 years, I've learned that you say it that way. We cut costs and we reduce carbon. If you just reduce carbon, but you're not cutting costs, please don't waste your time. So the fact that solar has evolved to the stage that we can significantly reduce costs, we improve sustainability and security the same way that Singapore is doing for the whole country. Like you don't want to be importing gas or oil or whatever and then having problems during a crisis getting access. You have a solar system on your roof, it's just going to sit there and pump power out. The reason I sold to Total is the, at least from my perspective, one of the most renewable of the oil and gas majors. And there's a battle that's happening between the utilities and the coal lobbies and various different lobbies around the world, and big titans of energy that can deploy hundreds of millions of dollars, actually tens of billions of dollars into this industry to dramatically change the world. And without someone like Total or Shell or whoever doing this, we're never going to see any change. Total's been doing energy for 100 years, been doing solar for 40 years. And given the SGInnovate background, I thought it was useful to say, I mean, I came from a startup. We work with startups wherever you can. There's a disruption happening in the energy industry. One is from fossil to renewable. The other is from centralized to decentralized. Rather than having a gas or nuclear power plant in the middle of a desert, and you send the power down the transmission, down the distribution, to the retailer, to the customer, co-locating batteries, smart building software. There's a whole load of different industries and a whole load of different businesses which are evolving, and we're working with startups We have a VC business that's invested $400 million into startups. And we see a really exciting brand new market that's taking off. We want to be part of it, and we want to work with partners who can help us to grow this for everybody.
Thank you, Gavin. Let's move on to Jayantika, who will give us the perspective from the vantage point of someone who's also in a startup, but not yet sold to big oil.
Hi, thank you, Jen. Morning, everyone. I am Jayantika. I am the co-founder and CTO of Resync. We are building an AI-driven energy cloud for distributed energy resources, like Gavin mentioned. As he mentioned, the world is moving towards a bit more of renewables that are being incorporated, and they are being incorporated in a decentralized manner. The biggest challenge that renewables face right now is the issue of intermittency that creates problem for the utilities, that creates problem in planning and distribution. So we at Resync are solving that. How we do that is we monitor, control, and optimize these distributed energy, whether it's solar, electric vehicles, energy storage, smart buildings, so on and so forth. We do that using our AI-driven platform solution, which also comes with a hardware component where we take real-time control of these different energy assets. We are one of the portfolio companies of SGInnovate, and we started Resync around 2.5 years ago with my co-founder, Emir. My background is basically a PhD in power and energy systems from National University of Singapore. And I took the learnings from my research to an implementation into a commercial product, understanding what are the current gaps in the industry, mostly the challenges the renewable energy developers or smart building operators or facility managers face, and incorporating that into as a part of our product. So we work primarily in a B2B space, enhancing and improving the energy efficiency operations and reducing the cost for energy managers in renewables, energy facility managers for smart buildings, so on and so forth. Yeah.
Thank you, Jayantika. We've got our 3 speakers today, one from government, one from big corp. I won't say big oil, I'll say big corp. And one still a small and nimble startup, all looking towards the greening of the energy sector. What's happening today? I mean, when we started 2020, our green energy goals were all intact, you know. We just watched Greta sail from Europe to New York. We just, you know, looked at the manifestations, the movements all over the world, and, you know, hand on our heart, we were marching towards cleaner skies, bluer skies, greener oceans. So what's happening today? The Singapore government has rolled out a slew of financial aid to companies and to individuals that have lost their jobs and, you know, have trouble getting income these few months. You know, that's just Singapore. If I look across Asia Pacific, you know, it's the same story everywhere, and perhaps worse. You know, as governments grapple with this economic fallout, are the projects still going ahead? You know, are people still talking about innovation in energy developments? How about, let's start with Gavin, because you look at projects across the world. Well, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, so Yeah, so we're doing projects in 8 countries, and you know, when I launched the business, the management said, well, why don't we just pick one country? 8 countries is going to be really complicated and difficult to manage. And I said, yes, but you need the risk diversification. You know, one country slows down, another one picks up, and that's really the fantastic thing about Singapore. You know, you sit as a financial hub, but also a hub of fantastic engineering and you know, highly educated people, surrounded by lots of countries that are taking off in different ways and going through different levels of economic growth. And so we've based here because also, you know, it's a fantastic sort of distributed generation hotbed. There isn't a lot of land. And so, you know, it's a fantastic place to learn how to put solar systems on rooftops and provide that to companies. We're monitoring this on a weekly basis, and then on a project by project basis. So we're seeing some countries that have really pulled back. You know, India went through a complete lockdown. Nothing was happening. We finished construction on a project for Renault Nissan a week before the lockdown, but we can't get any government agency to go and initialize that project. So yeah, that's stuck. But by contrast, you know, we signed our first project in Vietnam last week, which will be the biggest project in the country, or the biggest rooftop project in the country. And so we're seeing, what we're kind of seeing is customers are saying, my revenue line is gonna be impacted. There's nothing I can do about that. I therefore need to manage my costs more effectively, and fixed costs are a big impact. And how can I do that? And solar is one way that you can do that. We're having a really tough process in terms of constructing projects, because we need quarantining of our workers for 2 weeks before they can start work. So we take all our workers, we put them essentially in a hotel. They spend 2 weeks in the hotel, and then they're allowed to start work. That's tough, and that's, I think that's one of the things that you get from a big company like Total. We can say, okay, we'll absorb that cost. You know, it's quality and HSE and safety first. I read a really interesting report from the IEA on what has happened in Q1 with energy, and essentially energy has dropped 20% globally. It's like we've just had 3 months of Sunday. It's just like a Sunday kind of energy profile for the last 3 months. Doesn't feel like a Sunday for me. It feels more like a Monday. But and you've seen coal and oil get hit really badly on the energy generation side, down 8%. And you're seeing various different big oil CEOs come out and say this might be peak oil. You've seen gas drop 2%, but you've seen renewables actually increase the volumes that we're putting into the market. And I think the fact is that there's no inputs. It just sits on a roof or on a piece of land, or it's a windmill. It's just going to generate power. The marginal cost to operate is zero. And for me, it's inevitable. We're well past a question of whether or not renewables are going to take a big part of the world's power generation. It's cheaper, it's cleaner, it's a no-brainer. So I would imagine, you know, there'll be some demand reduction, and we are very sensitive about the credit of our customers, because we're taking a 20-year risk. We do all the investment, and we pray that they pay us for 20 years. So that's challenging, but generally, I only see an increase. And actually, you're seeing the Singapore government has done a very big, very, very big tender, one of the biggest tenders in the region, to push more solar into the market. So you know, I'm positive, I'm optimistic on what we'll see in the future.
Jay and Tico, how are things at your end, you know, on a more granular level, since you're looking at intelligent buildings and looking at how to help people manage their energy consumption?
So there is a global economic slowdown. So things have literally slowed down in terms of project implementation, or the timelines have been stretched for a longer period. So that we are seeing from our customers' end, that they have stretched the timelines for their projects, etc. And that in turn has impacted us to deliver a solution to them. So that's one thing. But coming to the energy consumption part, we monitored Singapore's energy consumption just before the circuit breaker, during the circuit breaker, and hopefully once the phase one will be implemented. So what we observed, especially in Singapore context, that before the circuit breaker, the weekday demand actually went up compared to last year, because we assume these are because of multiple things. Year-on-year growth is one of the things. Second thing, we also see there's a parallel work from home as well as factories that are being run. And that's why there was a spike in the weekday demand. And weekend went down because people were still trying to practice social distancing, physical distancing, and not going out that much, not going to the restaurants, the movie theaters, etc. During the circuit breaker in Singapore itself, we have seen a drop in demand of about 5 to 7%, which is equivalent to 6 gigawatt hour every day that we have seen during the month of April. We would be observing how things roll out once phase one initiates, because energy is one of the biggest indicator of how the economy is doing. So by looking at the energy data, we can predict when we can expect a substantial growth in our projects, a substantial growth in terms of our customer reinitiating their projects, or the overall feel of the economy, how it's going. Another challenge that we are facing, as I mentioned, we have a certain hardware component that we ship out to certain customers to provide real-time control. Because the supply chains are restricted to provide only essential service, we have the ready product sitting actually right here in my house, but I can't ship it because there are logistics issues that are there. But hopefully, as the lockdown eases across the world, we will be able to move forward with that. Another advantage that we are seeing, because there's a huge push from most of the companies to move towards more digitalization. That's where our platform comes in and provides like an onboarding technology on the software front itself. So we can help you identify your cost gaps, how you can make your operation and maintenance more efficient, and deploy your manpower more judiciously. The world is changing in terms of how we want to send the manpower to a particular site. If we make those decisions which are data backed, which are backed by the analytics of the site itself, then you can identify a key spot and directly send the manpower there and resolve in a matter of few hours rather than a few days, where you're monitoring the overall plant end to end. So that's where the technology part can come in. What we do at Resync, we also provide a forecasting mechanism on how your solar is going to generate, as well as a forecasting on the maintenance part. So even before the failures occur, you can anticipate, okay, I need to carry out my preemptive and predictive maintenance that I can carry out very strategically, very directively, rather than doing a general maintenance on the overall plant. So we would need to move towards more of such automation solution, because I believe even though we start to pick up, we will still have to maintain some element of physical distancing and social distancing for a considerable amount of time until we have the vaccine in place. So that's where technological solution can help us direct our resources better. Resync's platform can serve as one of the benchmarks in helping you create more optimal schedules, identify cost gaps, and make your system more efficient, both in terms of fixed cost and operating cost, as well as like maintenance cost, etc.
Okay, thank you, Jayantika. Adeline, between big corp and nimble startup, where do you stand? How are you going to, sort of hold the economy together?
I think it's a really challenging time for everyone, right, in the economy right now, and I don't think anyone is really spared, and it's not really I mean, the scale of the global demand destruction is unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really something that is, far bigger than any individual country can really control right now.
Yeah.
So even while Singapore is trying to, move towards a more normal state, over the next few months, and hopefully, in the near to medium term, we will still be, at the, we're part of global supply chains, we're part of the entire global economy, and it will also depend on how the rest of the world recovers from the crisis. So that's just, a dose of reality, I suppose. Not a very optimistic note to start off, but I would say that I think, on the other hand, the impact of the crisis or the current situation has really accelerated a few things. And one of them is, what Jayantika was talking about, that digitalization. And it's quite interesting because we have been, looking and talking to our industry partners about how, their operations have been affected. And it's interesting because, all these manpower restrictions in terms of the movement of people across borders, it's changed, the way that even, operators in the power sector, are thinking about how they are tapping on remote inspection tools, digitalization to overcome, the shortage and the of manpower and the ability, to access experts, and specialists to help them with their even maintenance or repairs and things like that. And it's changing the way that people are working, even in traditional industries. I mean, utilities is a very traditional industry. And it's happening in other industries. So it's not just the what's called frontier tech. I mean, I was just reading another article, I think about a month ago, in the MIT Tech Review, that talked about how in the past few years there's been a lot of hype around tech and Silicon Valley innovation. Which is very much focused around, digitalizing services and so on, But actually what we really lack now, and maybe, I suppose this webinar is salient because it's really about deep tech that's really going to help us overcome a lot of the problems that we face today, in terms of the way that we use things, the way that we build things, and the way that, we just interact with each other, the daily kind of daily life. And that's where there's a lot more innovation. There's so much potential for us to think about how we apply technology to really change the way we live and the way that we are able to use energy. So that's something that struck me. And I think another point that I would make is that the way that we approach it at the EDB is we think about it as an ecosystem. And definitely there's commitment at the government level. It's not something, as Gavin mentioned, it's not a fad that's going to go away. It's something that's inevitable. We do see that, over time, in the medium to the long term, we have to move towards a more sustainable, energy profile. And, last year was kind of like a bonanza year in government because we released all these, Singapore, renewed our commitments to the Paris Agreement. Right. And in fact, we enhanced it. So we committed to absolute emissions peak in 2030. And we also committed to halving our emissions target to 33 megatons by 2030 and to even, thinking about going to net zero, as soon as viable in the next half of the century. So that's really a statement of our commitment. And, when Singapore says something, we generally try to do it. Yeah. So that was something. And then we also, expanded our Energy Market Authority. They expanded our solar ambitions as well. So they announced this, I think, a few months ago that we've achieved our target of 350 megawatt peak. And we also announced new targets, of trying to achieve 2 gigawatt peak by 2030 in solar deployment and adoption in Singapore. Now that's, to be honest, that's going to be a really challenging target for us, given how, alternative energy disadvantaged Singapore is. So, I mean, across government, we're really, working very hard to make that happen. And, it involves rethinking the way that solar is deployed, at the, at the consumer front, but also at the, all the way up to thinking about how the grid, needs to change. You need to see a lot more innovation and deployment of energy storage systems, a lot more, thinking around how we manage the intermittency and the impact on the grid. And all these issues, which will become even more salient for Singapore. So I think there is a lot of potential there, and we're not, stopping our progress in those areas, as I mentioned earlier. And again, the way that we think about it is how do we build that ecosystem? And it's not just, okay, let's look for one company, that has the right everything in place, and then we just run with it. It's not quite like that. In fact, in environmental sustainability, and in particular in decarbonization, you do need the entire value chain and the entire ecosystem to come together, because of all the challenges, from the technology risks to making the project economics work, thinking about deployment issues from the regulatory standpoint, and all these issues that need to be overcome. So there is that ecosystem and that community that needs to work together. So it's not just about choosing between startup, or having the startup disrupt the big core, but it's about trying to think about how we can build that partnership together. And that's where we come in to try and support and grow the ecosystem. So I mean, that's happening in many areas of R&D and innovation in the energy space. So for example, yeah, sorry Gavin, but I have to mention this. We last year actually we had this initiative with ExxonMobil, for example, who was a founding partner of the Singapore Energy Center, where we brought together leading institutes of higher learning from the NTU and the NUS to come together to think about how we can really drive and grow industry relevant R&D and sustainable energy development. So that's one example of an effort. And also even in the maritime space, my colleagues in the Maritime Port Authority, they're also thinking about how they can collaborate with startup accelerators to drive maritime decarbonization efforts, because obviously Singapore is a leading aviation and maritime hub, and the use of low carbon sustainable fuels in both aviation and maritime is something that we are very interested in. And we've also launched a recent study into sustainable aviation fuels with our partners in Temasek, the SIA and the Changi Airport Group, to think about how that what's our vision, or how do we think about that in the Singapore context, and how do we deploy that. So and similar efforts going on with the MPA in the maritime space for maritime fuels. The use of LNG and other kind of like bio-based fuels is also something that they are exploring. So I mean, in different areas, we are trying to think about how we can build meaningful industry partnerships, and also bringing together different players in the ecosystem to really drive that collaboration and put together that value chain that needs to happen, before you can have a successful deployment of a really, leading kind of technology in Singapore in the industry. So that's how we think about it. Yeah.
Thank you. So here's a question. All right, I've decided to pick it up. It's from the audience. It says, oil and gas prices have been under a lot of pressure, making new lows. Does this change the incentives of grids moving from fossil to solar? Also, Gavin mentioned that the marginal cost of solar is 0. How does this compare in terms of all in cost versus natural gas generation, which is the lion's share of Singapore's grid? This is going to be for the two of you, both Gavin and Adeline.
A nice, easy question. Thank you very much for that. So if I throw some ideas and then pass to Adeline. So the first thing that we look at, we're looking at a landed cost. So we look at the cost of power generation, how much of that is coming from oil, gas, coal, whatever, transmission, distribution, retail, customer. So because I have that perspective, I'm a little bit mitigated on that. So the first thing is that oil is much less of the power generation mix these days. It's mainly coal and gas, if I think about the region. The second thing is that everywhere, whether it's the US or Philippines or Vietnam, it's the transmission and the distribution that nobody talks about that is the problem. So it's to give you an example, a 200-kilometer transmission line will take somewhere between 10 and 20 years to build, and will cost you about $2 to $3 billion. And so fundamentally, the utilities are thinking, how the hell do I upgrade that? It takes so long. It's so difficult because you're negotiating with lots of different permitting parties. So decentralized, I can drop a solar system on somebody's roof in 3 months from a signature. It's very quick, it's very easy, and the governments are just going to push that. There are some generating parties that are going to lose 10% or 20% of the power that they were able to sell before at a much higher rate. So broadly speaking, that's the dynamic. Now, if you then focus on Singapore specifically, it's mainly gas here. Gas is linked to oil and long-term trading contracts that mean that actually, even though gas is diverging from the price of oil, it doesn't in Singapore, not yet, and it's reducing over time. And Singapore has talked about some really interesting gas spot markets, which will enable us to really price gas at gas and oil at oil. So generally speaking, gas will have an impact, and the market. If you look at the last sort of 10 years in Singapore, when oil prices have dropped, grid prices have dropped. And then when you combine oil and gas prices dropping with demand destruction, we're expecting to see grid prices stay extremely low. But they were already low before COVID. Singapore has a reserve ratio, so that means more generation than the demand, of about 10 or 15%. It's much higher than most of the other markets, which means you already have very soft prices, and we're seeing gas companies fail. They're unable to get the revenues to cover the cost of their system, to cover the capex. We saw a very high-profile one last year. So I think we'll continue to see soft prices. I think we'll continue to see the grid low. But even at the current price, we can give 10, 20% discount to most customers out there. Hope that answered sort of, but I'll hand over to Adeline.
Yeah, actually, Gavin has kind of covered what I was about to say. So, but I would just vouch, maybe you wouldn't take it from Gavin because he's a solar guy, but I would say that, from our perspective, working with, in industry partners who are interested in the deployment of solar, and adoption of solar as an alternative source compared to natural gas powered electricity from the grid. Actually, there's been quite a lot of they've been actually really surprised by how cost competitive solar contracts are. So it's something definitely that is making the industrial customers sit up, because they consume large amounts of energy, and there is some pricing power there that and some way that actually that actually thinking about it from a long-term perspective, from a long-term energy use perspective, that can be quite a attractive pricing for them. So that's why I think that it's not something to be underestimated. Even though it looks like the cost dynamics today are not so favorable for given the price of gas and oil. Yeah.
If I just add one more thing to that, so to give some history, the long term, Adeline's point is really important. Long term solar costs, solar panel costs are reducing 10 to 20% a year, minimum. Right. Sometimes 30 or 40%. Long term, the power cost in Singapore has increased at 2 to 3%. Yeah. Power cost in Indonesia, 7 to 8%. Vietnam, 5 to 6%. So you're seeing the grid increasing at significant rates in the region, and you're seeing solar come down. It's inevitable.
I think the other factor that, you know, maybe people might not have factored in yet is really the trend in carbon prices, right? Maybe not in the rest of the region yet, but in Singapore, definitely we've started with a carbon price of $5 per ton of CO2, and we've also, you know, announced intentions to review that, you know, in 2023, and to think about, you know, higher rates, you know, at some point. So there, you know, there is also an effort, you know, that we are thinking about, you know, how do we really drive the decarbonization as well of our power, as well, you know, of our power sector in Singapore. And
Right.
gas will continue to be one important source, but I think there is a lot of scope for solar and other forms of renewables. So yeah.
One of the, if I can just add, sorry, Jin, one more thought. The first rooftop project that I did in Singapore was with Heineken, and Heineken said, I want to cut my costs, so I'm going to put solar on my roof, and I was working in a previous company at the time, and we did the project for them, and one of their marketing team did a video of the solar system, and it went viral online. And there was lots of reposting and LinkedIn and YouTube, etc. And they saw a 300% increase in beer sales.
Wow.
Right, and they now have a can. If you look at Tiger cans, they've got a little solar logo, and it says "Brewed by the Sun." And now, you know, they're doing that globally, right? So yes, there's a cost reduction on the cost of power. There's a carbon impact as well. But a lot of the consumer food and beverage sectors, they're getting a lot of pressure, and they're seeing increases in sales as well.
Because it costs less to use solar? Is that? Or because it's because they're modern.
It's because it's because they're showing that they're not just focused on making profit for shareholders, that they're thinking more broadly. It's a CSR type initiative. And if you look, for me, Starbucks is really interesting. If you look at the way Starbucks has approached sort of free trade and the design of their stores, there's lots of wood, it's very homey. Like they really portray their brand as being CSR and being a good corporate citizen, being part of who they are. And so companies are starting to realize how to do it. The truth is, most are not really sure how to do it. It's not about going, hey, I've just done a solar plant. It's about, you know, year after year showing this is the impact, the amount of trees or cars that I've removed. And I think companies are starting to realize that's an important, and I think that's the Greta effect.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So in today's papers, there was yet another article about the coronavirus pandemic and how it's brought energy consumption levels down. So it seems that people not flying around, that's contributed to a slight dip. Not as much as one would think, but people not driving around, not going to work, that's been the most significant change. That's something like a reduction of the 30% of the energy consumption generally. So that's classified under social transport. So it's not gone down to zero, right? Because the Amazon Prime delivery guy and the Grab food delivery guy is still driving around. So is this, but if you total up everything, not going to bars, not flying around, total it all up, we've gone down to the level of 2006. We've only, I mean, it's the biggest drop. It's worse than 2008, right? At the end of 2008, there was a shrinking of the numbers, but it was only a 1.5% dip, something to that effect, and then it rose up very quickly after that. So with all of this happening, we've only gone down to the level of 2006. So not quite the I don't know, the turnaround that we would have expected. do you think, I mean, okay, we talked about some of the changes that are taking place right now. I think one thing I got from Jayantika was digitalization. Right? I think that's one of the durable changes. That's one that's going to stay with us for a long time. Which other aspects of this, of what's happening now, do you see, you know, sort of continuing? Do you think we're going to just sort of go back to where we were before? Because that's what happened after 2008. We just went back to where we were before, and worse. You know, we produced more and consumed more. You know, it's a bit of crystal ball gazing, but we can couch it in terms of scenarios. You know, because if this happens, you know, what's next, and then if that happens, what's next?
What I think is going to happen, we will never return to what it was earlier. The pandemic itself has brought a change in our thinking, how we view at work. The most visible changes that you see are like the pollution has gone down in major cities. People are looking at clear skies, blue waters. So those are most of the visible changes that people are seeing. And that will, in effect, hopefully drive more towards the green economy. Even though the oil prices are really low, we hope that these kind of visible changes bring a cultural change. Like Gavin mentioned, that Tiger mentions that it's brewed by solar. And that's why, probably that's why the sales have increased, that people are interested. Oh, I am buying from a cleaner generated energy, basically. So these changes we will see. Digitalization obviously will remain one of the biggest pillars. Third thing is what technology can bring, what automation can solve the problems where there were labor-intensive work that were being done earlier. So, and in turn, an upgrade in the skills of the people. So they become more highly skilled, more technology-driven solutions that are available, more highly skilled labor force that we will have in the market as an effect of it. I don't know whether we will go back to what it was earlier, because 2008 was a recession. This is a pandemic. Those can be compared somewhat on an economic level, but they are not the same thing. We were still going out. We were still packed together in our MRTs going to the from one place to another, whereas that's not happening in the current day and scenario. So we hope that things will pick up, but things will start to get more efficient over time. People will look hard at their supply chain, look at their whole processing channel, and figure out how can I reduce cost as well as reduce the manpower cost in terms of that. So this is like my 2 cents on those.
Thank you, Jayantika. So Adeline, it sounds very much like Singapore is staying true to its decarbonization goals, despite the current economic fallout. It sounds like it's going to take us a little longer, but we're still on track.
Yes, absolutely. I think I think we have to be realistic, right? In the near term, what's important is to make sure that we manage to get through the crisis together, and businesses have a way to survive, and we also at least manage to get through it and get to that new normal that Jayantika was speaking about. And that's really the near-term focus. But I don't think that necessarily means that decarbonization is off the table and sustainability is off the table. In fact, I think we have more to think about. As Jayantika was speaking, I was thinking, one interesting thing to think about is, what would be the impact, on our energy profile, and if in the new normal, we have a more distributed form of work, more distributed profile, of where people work, how people live, and more, I think we are very community based. Humans are, we enjoy, community, and it's all about being social, right? Being human is about being social. And in the past, the way that we would do is we go physically somewhere and meet, in a physical location, and that changes the entire way energy use is distributed. There's a lot of that goes into transport, and there is a lot of concentration of that energy use, right, in particular locations and so on. And how is that going to change the way that that manifests in the new economy, in the new normal? It's something that we ought to think about, and what are some of the potential innovations and solutions that can help us use energy in a more distributed and yet more sustainable way. Something to think about, for me.
Residential rooftop solar.
Yeah. and at the end of it still comes down to cost and business. I'm sorry, I must confess I'm not a greenie, actually. My passion is in economic development, and it's always interesting, because for a lot of the decarbonization goals to happen, we really need to think about how to make the economics work. And that's why at the end of it, that's the innovation. There's also an element of innovation that we need, in the ecosystem. Think about business models, financing models, innovative business models to make that sort of energy innovation work. And that's something that I really think that for startups and for entrepreneurs and for people trying to make this work, it's not a trivial matter at all. It's something that we beyond just the tech element, something that we really need to think about. And that's really, to be honest, it's one of the challenges that I face in my work, trying to anchor and attract more of these innovative projects and technologies to be provided and started out of Singapore. But we press on, and hopefully when we land up in the new normal, it will be we will see that those innovations take place, and a lot more of that technology coming to fruition, I suppose. Yeah.
Thank you, Adeline. So it sounds like, I thought today's panel was very apt. We've got government, we've got big corp making a big gesture to go green, a commitment in its future plans. We've got the nimble startup, which is synonymous always, right, with innovation, because you need to disrupt, and to disrupt you need to start out on your own. It sounds very much like Adeline mentioned the word community. So we are a community, and the ADB has set up this ecosystem in Singapore for all of us to come together. And it sounds like we need to stay with this partnership, to build up on this partnership, to continue on the trajectory that we set out on. It sounds like although there's a slight lull, it sounds like some changes are here to stay, and we can't. And this should not be a detraction from the saving of planet Earth, and us leaving a better world for the people that come after us. So on that note, I'm gonna have to round up this discussion, and we're coming close to the end of the session. If it's okay for people to stay on, I can take a few more questions from the audience. Would that be okay? All right. If you
yeah, sure.
Yeah, all right. If you see any questions,
I'd like to address a question that's coming up and again about the intermittency of solar and how they're going to how we are supposed to tackle it. So that's one of the biggest issues, right? Now the solar is cheaper as compared to coal, as compared to it's comparable to gas in pricing. The next big issue is to maintain the reliability in the system. So that will not come from one energy asset alone, because solar, as we know, is unpredictable, especially in tropical areas like Singapore. It's highly unpredictable. That needs to be augmented with different energy generation assets like storage, as well as more technological assets. So we are exploring an aspect of demand response, where we try to match the demand compared to what the generation that we have right now, and create it in a more sustainable manner. So this is a project that we are doing with a grant from EMA, as well as a collaboration with NUS, where we accelerate the demand response and demand management in combination with renewable energy generation, in combination with host of different energy assets, whether it's coming from the utility, whether it's coming from energy storage, or whether there are electric vehicle chargers on board. And also on the consumption side, looking at more controllable demand in terms of air conditioning systems, in terms of refrigeration system, and also looking at certain aspects on the commercial building side, industrial and building sites, where we can implement this demand response, which is non-disruptive as well as like non-intrusive, but takes the effect which are necessary in the domain. So it will not be one single solution that we will see in the future of maintaining this delicate balance, but we will see more technologies being implemented. I saw a mention somewhere about a CHP, small scale CHP plant. So those are definitely going to form the essential of the microgrids that we are going to see. So we will see much more microgrids inside the centralized system. So it's not going to be one single technology. It's going to be whole mix of things that we are going to see to balance the intermittency issues, to maintain the reliability in the system.
If I could just back that up, our name, my company name is Total Solar, and it didn't take very long for everybody to say, oh, damn, there's other renewables, there's lots of other options, and actually we're not really doing just solar. For example, we're currently building one of the largest microgrids in the region, which is it's an island in Cambodia, and we're installing storage batteries, lithium batteries, plus solar, and we're interfacing into an existing diesel to provide power to a whole load of different demands. Restaurants, hotels, businesses nearby. The way I think about that is you've got startups that are going out and they're saying, okay, I can see where we are now. I can see 1 year ahead. I can see 5 years ahead. I'm going to go and build that business for whatever, 1, 3, 5 years from now. I'm going to stabilize it, work out the business models, work out the technology, put it all together, and then when the rest of the industry, when the world gets to the right level, bam, we're going to be able to take part, and I'll be ready to help build all of that. And that's what I did as on a rooftop basis. So coming to Southeast Asia 10 years ago to kind of do that, that's happened, and I can see now that's inevitable. For me, it's mainstream. It's not. The awareness is very low. Very few companies know about this, and we spend most of our time talking to people who say, oh, wow. But storage is definitely coming. We're seeing a cost reduction of 25% for the total cost of storage. And Total kind of tiptoed into this project in Cambodia thinking, God, this could be really expensive. Let's work out whether this makes sense. Do the economics make sense? And Adeline's absolutely right. If the economics don't make sense, it's not going to happen. That system is 40% cheaper than the diesel. It's an LCOE, so it's an electricity cost of about 17 cents per kilowatt hour. That means that it is almost the same amount for that solar plus battery as it is for what we pay to SP or to whoever we're buying power from, and it's dropping 25% every year. So 2 years from now, it's going to be a discount on grid power here. 4 years or 5 years from now, it's going to be very, very, very cheap. So intermittency is a really critical part, and I think one part is storage, but the other part is definitely AI and the kind of stuff that Jayantika was talking about.
Gavin, maybe we should speak later about this
Yes.
microgrid project as well.
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
quite interested in that.
Cool.
Okay, I've got this question that you've probably, I'm going to pick this question. You've probably been asked many times over the last 15 years. If you don't mind, I'm going to put it to you again. It says, for Gavin, can solar energy be stored so it can be used at night, for instance?
Fundamentally, the first answer is no, but solar by itself, no. We need to add batteries. We've looked at a few projects. There's a startup in Singapore that we're working with at the moment, who's quite famous for working with hotels and resorts, and what they're called Canopy Power. And what they do is they will install solar, they'll install storage, and they will use that storage to cover the power demand from about 10 p.m. to about 2 a.m. And why do they take that piece? It's because you're going to bed and you don't want to hear a diesel generator as you're going to sleep. And so, you know, it's viable economically with the current price of batteries to go and do, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 hours worth of storage to cover that specific business case. So, you know, that is exactly the question. Solar is going to be 10, 20% of the grid until we can solve either a demand response generation AI type solution that I think Jayantika's talking about, and or storage to be able to cover power through the night.
Okay, thank you. That's very enlightening. Put that question to rest. This is a question for Adeline. What are the alternative sources of energy that are viable in Singapore?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I was just about to answer that question as well. The short answer is not much, because, you know, Singapore doesn't really have very high wind speeds, and we're in a very stable, at least we're located on stable ground. So we don't, geothermal is not, well, as far as we know yet, viable, and nuclear clearly is something that's, yeah, definitely a very long while away. So because of that, really, I think the way that, you know, we think about it is as you know, the Energy Market Authority set out in the energy story. You know, we rely on 4 switches to think about, you know, the different sources of energy for Singapore. So one obviously is LNG, natural gas. The second is solar. And the third being, you know, electricity imports, in fact, is one thing that we are considering. And finally, you know, low carbon alternatives are also something that we are studying, you know, in a very dedicated way right now. So it would be things like hydrogen, as well as carbon capture and utilization as a complement, you know, to existing fossil-based fuel sources. And in fact, you know, the EDB and the Energy Market and the EMA and our colleagues at the National Climate Change Secretariat have been, you know, embarking on a few studies in the recent couple of years to look at, you know, the viability of different carbon capture and utilization and storage pathways for Singapore. As well as, you know, hydrogen as a potential source, you know, of you know, alternative energy for Singapore as well. I mean, even though I think that my own personal view of that is that, you know, hydrogen is a bit more longer term, just because it's going to take some time for, you know, green hydrogen, at least the cost of that to come down. And because Singapore is not renewable energy abundant, we're going to have to think about, you know, how we participate in the global supply chain for hydrogen, for green hydrogen, if we want to, you know, we want to go into that space. So that's something that we are studying quite carefully. I wanted to pick up on another point. I think there was a question around the viability of floating solar. And yeah, actually, yeah, so there's actually been quite a lot of active interest in that and activity happening, in Singapore around that. So in fact, the EDB and we partnered with our PUB, the Public Utilities Board, who basically takes care of the reservoirs in Singapore, to deploy floating solar projects, at the reservoirs. So I think there's one coming up at Tengeh Reservoir. And you would be probably familiar with Sunseap. I think that's trying to deploy offshore floating solar system, and that's something that's also really interesting. I think there's a lot of potential for innovation, I think, in that space, because you need to think about how to reduce the amount of degradation that happens to the panels in a floating solar in an offshore environment, and depending on the kind of water environment that you're talking about, is it saline or in a reservoir, that can be very different. And then of course thinking about the environmental impact and so on. So I think I think it's also a really interesting space to think about. And another thing that we are also trying to interest the R&D community and the innovation community in is the potential from building integrated PV as another new area that maybe coming up, and that could potentially have a lot of application in Singapore because of our highly built up urban environment. So that's something that we are also interested in.
Sounds fantastic. Have you got, did you like to add to it, Gavin, on the floating solar bit? Or
So
has she said it all?
so floating. I mean, Adeline covered it. She stole my fire. Yeah, no, definitely. I think floating solars are fantastic. Because you're also preserving the water resource at the same time. It's cooler for the panels. And we're looking at those kind of projects, and you're seeing, I mean, again, Singapore kind of lead the region. So you're seeing Singapore doing these kind of projects, doing them in a really scientific way. So you had, CERES, the Solar Energy Research Institute of Singapore, I think, do an analysis, look at 10 different technologies, work out which one was the best, publish the data, and then go and do much. I mean, it's really, as an English person, it's really embarrassing being in Singapore and looking at how the Singapore government works, and then comparing it to how we would operate in England. So, probably shouldn't say that, but so floating, definitely, I see that growing as an opportunity, and that's something I think we'd look at going forwards. And then the use of BIPV. So what I was really heartened by is Singapore insisting that any new building must be solar ready. That was a new rule that came in last year or the year before. The most frustrating thing for me is to see, I get quite excited about rooftops. I buy magazines that, just lots of photos of rooftops. Any rooftop that has a little frame over the top or a nice little, design thing, it drives me wild. So solar ready rooftops are really easy, very simple, and seeing that happen and now seeing that start to spread throughout the region is really, really valuable. So
is it not quite as sunny enough in Singapore?
Yeah, so are
we too small or too cloudy?
So the space. It's just space. So the 2 gigawatt estimate for Singapore involves covering all the rooftops in Singapore, and that's 1/3 of our current demand. And the amount of solar irradiation in Singapore is, it's not great. It's a little bit diffused. It's a little bit sort of hazy. It's not clear sort of desert sun. But it's still good enough. So I think, but you would only be able to do 1/3 of the country's power with an intermittent source. Jayantika is absolutely right. You only need one cloud to come over Singapore, and they come over, every couple of minutes, and it just, bam, you've got 1/3 your power generation going off the grid, and there's no way for gas to ramp up fast enough. And Ceres, the same institute, have done this incredible process of mapping the entire country, looking at all the different rooftops, working out how much solar can come from there, working out where all the existing solar projects are, and then using 3D mapping of the clouds as they move around Singapore, and in order to predict when is that cloud going to impact Singapore, how much solar is going to be shut down as a result of each cloud, so that you've got a couple of minutes, because I think that the new gas plants need 1 to 2 minutes to ramp up, to kind of ramp the generation up to cover the solar. So what's really exciting is that's just the tip of the iceberg. The stuff that Jayantika's talking about in terms of tuning, turning down demand, turning down air conditioning and things like that. You're going to need that. You're going to need storage. You're going to need, the kind of government level, grid level initiatives that you're doing in Singapore. It's only at this combination, and that's why the ecosystem is so important. Like, we'll come and do, a bit of solar. Someone else will come and do storage. You need that combination, and hey, there's plenty to go around.
Excellent, excellent. So thank you all for this very interesting, fruitful, invigorating discussion. Because it's a webinar and I'm not looking at an audience in the room. I don't have a feel for how the audience is taking this, but personally, I found this extremely interesting, and I've learned a lot from the three of you. And with that, I think we've come to the end of this webinar. I can see Waymin flashing up to bring the session to an end. Thank you very much, SGInnovate and ADB Dutch Chamber of Commerce for organizing the webinar. I think I speak on behalf of the three panelists.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Waymin, you might be on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I totally forgot about that. Yeah, so I think today we actually received quite a bit of questions. It's unfortunate they were not able to address each and every one of them, but I think our speakers has actually give us a very great discussion, also great insights on the topic of the future of energy innovation. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for all the attendees for stayed with us until now. Although we have overrun a little bit, so keep a lookout for our post-event mail, where we'll be posting the YouTube link of today's webinar session, as well as if you want to know more about the topic, we actually have another event on the 17th of June. That's where we actually have a panel discussion from other speakers, where actually part of SGInnovate's works to link up and promote collaboration between startups and corporates. So this will actually be exhibited in this event, where several startups from the region will be invited to pitch about their innovative solutions on key industry themes such as operational efficiency, e-mobility, and sustainability. So if you're interested, do check out our event on the website and register for it. And with that, we have come to end this session. Thank you, Tias, in partnering with SGInnovate, representing ADB Dutch Chambers of Commerce.